Thank you. We're back from our break in the wonderful California sunshine and ready to hear XLH, the transition from childhood to adulthood, from Carolyn Macica. I mispronounce it every time. Come up and say your name. Carolyn is at Quinnipiac. I just don't even know why I try. University, which is in Connecticut also, and the last XLH Day was held in Indianapolis, and the one before that was at Quinnipiac University. And every XLH Day has a common thread, and that is Carolyn, who is the chair of our Scientific Advisory Board, and the tremendous amount of work she does to line up professional expert speakers, which takes some doing on top of her heavy schedule as an assistant professor at the university. She also does research, and I hope you're going to share a little bit about that in your presentation. There is, as you heard from Dr. Pertali first this morning, we're still a mystery. Rare diseases are a mystery. There's limited research money, and with government cuts to the National Institute of Health, that impacts the ability to fund research that needs to be long-term. There are no instant answers. It has to be long-term. The more I've gone to Congress to lobby and worked with the National Association of Rare Diseases and the ASBMR, American Society for Bone and Mineral Research, it's really been an education about how lucky we are to have someone interested, a company, Ultragenics in Kawakuran, I said that wrong too, interested in pursuing a treatment for XLH. So I'd like to turn it over to Carolyn now. Thank you.
Thank you, Becky, very much. Welcome, everybody. I see some familiar faces, and I see some new faces, and I see actually a couple people that I've more recently come to know. I see Carol. Hi. So Carol just visited us at Quinnipiac at the Snetter School of Medicine for a study that we're conducting over there, and it's a study that really is focused on the adult disorder, and that really has, I think, been my calling in terms of XLH, because it really is a neglected area of X-linked hypophosphatemia. My lovely assistant up there, awesome. So the name of my talk today is X-linked hypophosphatemia Beyond the Adolescent Years, and Healthcare Transitioning and Rare Disease. Some of the information that I'm going to be sharing with you today comes from my colleague at Quinnipiac, Maya Doyle. So Maya Doyle was at the university for 2 weeks when I heard she was there, and the poor woman hadn't even unpacked her bags, and I was at her office door begging her to become part of the research process of X-linked hypophosphatemia. And as some of you know, anybody that sort of comes into my orbit, I suck them in to the XLH world, and so I've managed to get kind of a nice team of people at the Snetter School of Medicine to become involved in better understanding this disease. So Maya was really special. She is a licensed social worker. Her Ph.D., this is what I learned about her, is in rare diseases and sort of transitioning the impact, the psychosocial impact that rare diseases have or chronic disorders have on the patient and on the family. And also, she's very interested in the transition that occurs between adolescence and adulthood, which can be a very, very difficult and trying time, especially when you know you have a chronic disorder that will manifest itself throughout adulthood. So we have a few of her slides that I stole from her. We're hoping she's part of the next activity for XLH. She had a conflict for today's meeting, so I'm hoping you'll meet her again soon. She's really wonderful. Whoops. I'm going to show you a quick video that we made at the university. Our movie star in the movie is Dr. Tom Carpenter, who's one of my colleagues that I've worked with. on XLH when I was at Yale. And I just want to share this with you, and then we're going to have a little bit of a narrative about it. Thank you.
My name is Chase, and I am 9 years old, and I live in Raleigh, North Carolina.
After talking to some friends, they referred me to a university orthopedist that they had been to. So I took Chase and Cohen because he had symptoms as well, and they did x-rays. And in that same visit, the orthopedist came in and said, he has X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets. Through them, I realized, they got this from me. These are all the symptoms that I had, and I got them from my dad. I never received any treatment as a child. It didn't really severely affect me at such a young age. It wasn't until I was much older where it really started having debilitating symptoms. Once I went to this university and they diagnosed my children with XLH, when we went to the appointment, she had to look it up online. When it comes to my kids, I want to go to someone who knows a lot about it. I found some articles and then found who wrote this. It was, Dr. Carpenter.
We've been able to work closely with them and their local physicians to manage their condition, we think, optimally. Children with this disorder are generally required to take multiple medications every day.
When I wake up in the morning, I have to take calcitrol and phosphorus, and then when I go to school, I have to take 2 more.
4 times a day, our boys are taking supplements. That's a big responsibility for a 6 and 9-year-old to do that.
It has been kind of hard how we explain it to him and try to keep him from being discouraged for little things that are big things for him.
I like to play outside and play basketball and play baseball and football.
He's very good at baseball and he can put it in the outfield, but if he doesn't, then probably not going to make it to first base, stumbling over his feet. It is heartbreaking because he's trying so hard.
Where Chase struggles to keep up with his competitors, gets tired more quickly than his teammates.
The child is at great risk if the diagnosis is not made early. Multiple and severe bow deformities occur. The game changes a little bit in adulthood. Mild deafness is not uncommon, and sometimes vertigo can even happen. And ringing in the ears or tinnitus can occur. The dental abscesses can also continue throughout adult life, and arthritis is very common.
I believe it's really important that medical students and residents learn about X-linked hypophosphatemic rickets because this is our future, this is my children's future. People need to know earlier. We need to be able to detect it. People are going to have the same kind of symptoms that we do, maybe more severe, and they're not going to be treated. And the people that already have it aren't going to have answers.
Investment in research in this area is critical. It's critical not only for the patients that have XLH, but it's very important for the people that have many other types of bone and mineral disorders.
Much of what we know about XLH we learned through a listserv, through XLH Network. I watched my wife spend hours and hours and hours reading
Any new symptom that came up for me or for my children, I would also type in and realize, okay, so other people are having this too.
The symptoms of XLH are real to me. They affect my life each day. I see my 2 children struggling with these symptoms. I see my wife struggling with it. What I want to do is help bring awareness so that not only can we have the right physicians in our hometown or the right medications, but that one day we could find a cure.
So I really want to extend a thank you, a special thank you to the Putnam family who generously donated their time and their energy. Took 8 hours of shooting. Dr. Carpenter was very, very generous with his time. And we were awarded a Telly Award for medical education as a result of this. And we saw that we have a special guest. Bill Coogan showed up that day. He's the eye candy in the photo. And that was a carefully scripted video. You saw there were a lot of messages in there, and the reason for making this video was to make the point that, I mean, how many of you have experienced that you kind of had to educate your own clinician? Yeah, I see a lot of, yeah. So it's important that we do better educate our medical students. The day I left yesterday, before I came here, we had a pathology lab. We happen to be in Bone and Joint Week at the year 2 at the medical school right now. So I snuck a whole bunch of path sections into the pathology lab of X-linked hypophosphatemia. So all of the Netter School of Medicine kids are going to know XLH. But that's very uncommon. So we really do have to work hard in better educating our medical students to recognize rare diseases, to when something doesn't look right, to be inquisitive enough to say, I need to look a little more closely. Something's different. Something's wrong. So the other reason I showed the video is that, you know, our IT department screens some of the postings and they selectively post some of them. And one day I was online looking at the video or showing it to somebody, and I noticed there was a new post. And this is a lot to read. I used to kind of read it out loud, but I always start crying because it's so heartbreaking. The story here is a mom who's talking about her daughter, and she did all the things that you could possibly do for her daughter. She brought her to great clinicians. She made sure she had the best medicine, the best care. She, took the time to learn everything. And then if you kind of go down, you say she starts talking about not being prepared for the level of pain and suffering that her child now had to endure. She just wasn't prepared mentally, physically, or resource-wise to deal with this new transition now from childhood to, from adolescence to adulthood. And it's got a really sad ending that her daughter has effectively given up. Where are you? I have been trying to find you, and this is like an amazing, exactly. And so I'm here today to tell you that there are some of us out there that are really committed to making sure we change the outcome of this story. There's not a lot of us. Oh, I know that. I know that there's not a lot of time left. So what we want to do is we want to make sure that people are aware of the suffering and of the pain, and that more has to be done in terms of funding and understanding this disorder. And there are people who are committed to this. And the FGF23 antibody studies, the support of companies like this who are supporting my studies are really, really important. So Dr. Pertelli used the word that used to be used sort of commonly, and that is familial rickets or vitamin D dependent rickets. And I actually reviewed a couple of papers this year where they use that terminology. And in my reviews, one of the things I said is stop using that terminology. It's outdated, and it brings to mind rickets, which is a childhood disease. This is not only a childhood disease, it's an adult disease. And so let's go back to the nomenclature of using X-linked hypophosphatemia for this disease. So we're all pretty familiar with the childhood disorder. This is the adult disorder. So the adult disorder has a number of comorbidities associated with that, and that is a lot of bone spurs and a degenerative arthritis. You heard about Rebecca in the video. She actually has severe vertigo and tinnitus to the point where it's sometimes debilitating. The abscesses, the dental abscesses that persist. So in the lab, I studied this, and I found that the height mouse that Dr. Portelli told us about was actually a really good model, because the mice also develop a degenerative arthritis. The mice also develop bone spurs all over the place. So then I knew I had a tool in which to start to better understand, why do these things happen? What's causing them? What are the cellular mechanisms? I also started to study autosomal recessive hypophosphatemic ricket model, and that's another model where we have, again, another elevated levels of FGF23. And what we found in that mouse model was that they also developed these bone spurs and the changes in the cartilages. And so what that told us, that was an important hint, an important cue that it wasn't the actual FEX mutation that was causing this, but it was something about the FGF23 molecule that was helping to precipitate these problems. We also made a mouse where we overexpressed FGF23, and when we did that, those mice also developed these same disorders. So we know that FGF23 is the real bad guy in this disorder. I'm not going to go into the findings that we have. They're very technical, but the bottom line is that really intercepting at the level of this molecule will be predicted to have a very much more positive outcome on the development of some of the adult disorders. And that's largely going to be attributed to improving the integrity of the bone matrix. The stronger we can make that bone, the better we can minimize those bone spurs from forming. The bone spurs, I found, are forming just as it's actually a compensatory mechanism by your body to kind of strengthen that insertion. So the ones that are really heavily affected are the spine, the longitudinal ligament in the spine, the Achilles, the knees, the hips. And what the insertion sites are doing is they're making more mineral, those little bone spurs, and that's making that insertion stronger. The reason it needs to do that is because those bones are so soft. And so if we can make those bones mineralize better with something like an FGF23 antibody, then we can potentially minimize the effects that we see on both the cartilages and in the insertion sites. The other thing that I'm studying is, which is another area that's been completely sort of neglected, is what is the impact of pregnancy and lactation on the maternal skeleton? So I have a student who's working on this, Eva Mente. She's here. She's actually doing the kids program today. She's an amazing young lady. And so what we found, I'm not showing you the data today, but what we did find is that just like in a normal pregnancy, in late pregnancy, mineral comes from upregulating 125. So a mom that's not affected, to make more calcium and phosphate available to the developing skeleton of the developing fetus, 125 levels go way up. And that helps to get calcium and phosphate in the gut to the baby. The other thing that happens is late in pregnancy and then during breastfeeding, all of the mineral comes from mom's skeleton, and that's very normal. And we never really understood why mom's skeleton can recover so quickly and so reversibly. So we've answered a lot of these questions in this study. We just submitted this for publication, but we had a couple of findings that were really surprising to us. Number one, moms, this is in the height mouse, mom mice during pregnancy can suddenly, their 125 levels are very low normally because they have XLH and they have high levels of FGF23. What we found is that for the first time in the life of this mouse, 125 levels go way right up into the normal range. We don't know why. We think it might be associated with a hormone called prolactin, but suddenly 125 levels normalize. The other thing the height mice have is hyperparathyroidism. They have high PTH levels. And during pregnancy, mom's levels of PTH go down. And that's thought to be a protective mechanism. It's protecting mom's skeleton until the end of pregnancy and saying this, we're all going to get all of your calcium and phosphate for a baby by 125 vitamin D. And so PTH levels go way down. We looked at the mouse, and guess what happens in the mouse that normally has really high PTH levels? They came down. So it seems that the maternal skeleton in the context of XLH can really adapt to these changes. I guess one of the more troubling findings we have is that because there's so little trabecular bone in XLH, that what happens is all the cortical bone, the long bones, we start to see enormous amounts of mineral being removed from the cortical bone. So this has important implications so that perhaps we need to start as we learn more from these studies that we need to pay a little bit more attention, especially in later pregnancy and when advising women about breastfeeding, that there might be some need for closer management. So Eva, our proxy for studying this in humans is actually teeth. So we can't take bone samples from people, but we can take teeth. So teeth is the same mineral. So mineral is calcium and phosphate. The mineral in the dentin of teeth is calcium and phosphate. So we wrote an IRB, we put out an announcement for teeth. I have teeth all over my office. Stop sending teeth. Thank you. I'm good. So we can hardly get through the ones, but we're analyzing it, and we found some really, really interesting and exciting data using those teeth about the special structure of calcium phosphate in the mineral. But we also sort of by mistake answered a question, I'm not going to get into it today, but how mom's skeleton normally can recover so quickly during pregnancy and after lactation. So these have been very fruitful studies. So transitioning. So there's this whole transition period from childhood to adulthood. And the goals for transitioning for young adults with special health care needs is, and I'm going to quote this because it's so well written, to maximize lifelong functioning and potential through the provision of high quality, developmentally appropriate health care services that continue uninterrupted, that's important, uninterrupted, as the individual moves from adolescence to adulthood. So again, there needs to be some sort of plan going forward with your kids to make sure that they are able to be better prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. And hopefully those challenges with our new therapies will be a little less. So at which age do you think a transition plan should start with your kids? When you're starting to say, all right, we're moving away from your pediatrician. We're going to now have to transition. I know it's really hard to let go of our pediatrician, especially when you have clinicians like Dr. Pertelli, but there comes a time where it's time to go on. So what age do you think? We got all kinds of range. So the recommended age is really quite young. This is a long process. There's a lot of things that have to be done to prepare for this process. So first, what do young adults need to know about XLH? And so hopefully this is something that Eva is helping to accomplish today. She's over there with the older adolescents, talking to them and educating them more about their disease. Education is power. The more you know, the more power you have, and the more you can take the time to explain to people what it is that you have. So first, teaching your kids what is XLH. What are the basic mechanisms of the disease? How do you manage the disease? Both treatment, physical therapy, and I would throw in there occupational therapy. We'll talk a little bit about that. What is the progression? What is the normal progression of the disease? What are the things that we should expect going forward? What do the data show? Education and employment. So when you start a job as a young adult, is there adaptive equipment or modifications to the environment that need to occur for you to be a better employee or employee? There's a lot of legal support for you so that you have requirements, that you have these sorts of support, and that you can have somebody come in and to work from occupational therapy to assess the work environment and to make recommendations to the company as to how to make this person's day as normal as it can be. Also, genetic issues and reproductive decisions. It's never too early to talk to your kids about some of the genetic ramifications of having a familial disorder. And I'm not going to steal, we have a wonderful expert here today who was contacted through one of my colleagues, Dr. Barbara Pober, who studies disorder, a rare disease. She's one of my colleagues. So she was able to reach out, and now today we have Kim Barr, who's going to share with us some more on the genetics. So those are some of the challenges, and here are some of the resources. So here's 2 links, and we can provide this data to you. But they're both excellent websites. There's a lot of information and a lot of toolkits available to you on these websites about having these conversations, the things that you should be able to do, the communication that you have with the pediatrician, setting up a game plan for transitioning your kid from from an adolescent care provision to adult care provision. Also, legally now we know because of Obamacare that your child can stay under your health care until they're 26. So again, what happens after that? There's issues about legal guardianship, and just in the case that your child is unable to care for him or herself. So there's really a lot of information out there on these websites about this, and I really wish Maya was here because she's sort of an expert in navigating this sort of information. So what are we doing now? I'm working very hard to continue the studies that I'm doing. Out of the generosity of Ultragenics and an organization called Global Genes, which you'll hear about today too, which is a wonderful umbrella organization that brings together all of the rare diseases under one united organization. And again, if you look at the big picture, XLH is this big. You look at the picture of all of the rare diseases together, now you have a lot of power to make change. So I encourage you all to get involved in these bigger umbrella organizations because together you really can have a large impact on where does the funding go. Why don't we fund rare diseases? Why is it so difficult to get the NIH to pay for a study? So I wanted to talk about this. So we put together an interprofessional team using the funding from both these organizations. And it includes physical therapy, occupational therapy, medicine, diagnostic imaging, the School of Social Work. So we had our first 2 rounds of studies at the university. Carol was there for our second day. She can tell you she found it really satisfying. It was a long, hard day. She was poked and prodded, and she probably had more diagnostic imaging than she's ever had in her life. It was astonishing seeing the x-rays, I have to tell you. We did DEXA scans, x-rays of things that probably you wouldn't even blink an eye at. It was just astonishing. The amount of spinal fusions that we saw, the number of osteophytes that we saw, hardware that was misplaced, loose screws floating around in the x-rays. I mean, it was unbelievable. But we're not doing this as an exercise of, let's learn, let's take more pictures of these things. What we're doing is we're creating a program so that we're getting input now from the occupational therapist, from the physical therapist. They're making measurements and they're correlating the physical changes that we see in the aging adult with their measurements, and we're saying, okay, with this sort of disorder, this would be the optimal type of physical therapy that we would advise this patient with. And we're actually developing physical therapy programs. The occupational therapist, who are also trained in social work, come in and they talk to about what are the challenges from day to day. And what we know is that, you know, you're like, well, I've always wanted to climb Mount Everest. That's not what we're hearing. We're hearing, I just want to bake cookies again. I want to be able to walk my dog. I want to be able to, you know, spend time with my grandchildren. So we're taking all of these data and we're integrating them. And what we hope to come up with is a kind of a program that's integrated, that's specific to the adult disease. So it's, you know, I have 17 people on the team. It includes students in every parts of these areas. So not only are they learning, but, you know, there's been some real eye-opening from these students where they're like, wow, this is amazing. So hopefully this will have a lifelong impact on them in terms of long-term learning. So what can you do? Well, I know we're always asking you to do stuff, and I'm sorry for that. But you are your best advocate because only you understand the challenges that you're faced with every day. So there are organizations that you can get involved in, like the XLH network. You know, Becky's sort of like me. Don't get too close to her. You'll get sucked into her orbit and you'll be doing something. You'll be copying something, writing something, submitting something. But there's, you know, get involved with organizations. There's an excellent website here. Again, we can make this information available to you. NORD has some amazing resources on their website. Sit down, go through it, see what sorts of things appeal to you. Also, at this stage, in working with your pediatrician, have that conversation. You need to, you know, start early, talk about where are we transitioning to. There's not a lot of PCPs or endocrinologists that know a lot about this disease. So start doing your research. Use your current pediatrician to help educate the transitional clinical team. That's their job. You've hired them to do that. Develop a 504 plan for your kids. You are all legally entitled to a 504 plan for your kids. Go to the school, make sure that the environment, bring an occupational therapist in or the school counselor. They're obligated to do this by this legislation, and to look at the environment and just make sure that your kid has the same advantages that all the other children in the school have. And it might just make their day easier. And it doesn't have to be obvious. I know kids, I know my daughter, she has a rare disease. They don't want to stand out, they don't want to be different. But, you know, there are ways of doing this that are really sensitive to the kids, and a lot of it can be done behind closed doors. But, you know, it's a great tool for you, and you're certainly within your rights to develop this sort of program for your own children. I want to thank today Erica Parisi and Eva Mente. They're two wonderful medical students. I now have a third that's working on another project for recognizing the importance of studying XLH, and they've both been very committed to working on this with me. And then finally, I just want to show this picture. This is a paper I reviewed last year. This isn't some old book that we found on the shelf. This is 2014. This is a paper that came out of Saudi Arabia. This family was never diagnosed, never received care, and you can see that there's so much more to do. I mean, they finally got a diagnosis for this family. They're finally getting therapy. The reason they got a diagnosis is one of the family members went to a dentist. This is actually published in a dental journal, and they went to a dentist, and the dentist said, wait, something's crazy here. There's a lot of dental abscesses. There's some serious issues. And so fast forward, they finally got a diagnosis. So, you know, this is not something that, you know, we fixed it. We all know we have it. I'm sure many of you didn't get a diagnosis at some point. You didn't get a diagnosis until you had a child that was diagnosed. So there's so much more to learn about this disease. We're not done. We've just begun. But I assure you that there is a cohort of us that are extremely committed to the adult disease and that you're not forgotten. And it's really your job to get out there and make sure that we get the sort of funding that we need to get these studies done. And I thank you so much for your attention today. I have time for a couple of questions? Yes. Becky's going to throw me off the stage if we're behind. Okay. Okay. Any questions, comments, observations?
So in the pregnancy, what happened to the level of FGF23?
So FGF23 levels remain elevated. So there's something that's kind of overriding that, and it's going to be a very complicated answer. You know, I think it's going to involve something like a molecule like prolactin that's able to kind of put a brake on these things and to say, okay, it's okay now to upregulate 125. I mean, you know, in some ways this study has given us more questions than answers, but like that's what research is. There is no answer. There never is an answer in research. That's why it's such an exciting thing to do. You're always looking for, what's going on. We've never answered anything, but certainly we've learned a lot. And it always seemed kind of shocking to me. I'm like, hasn't anybody thought about the impact this has on the maternal skeleton? And I didn't show you the pictures today. They're a little bit. They're not the prettiest, to look at. It's quite a dramatic effect. So, we need to have our clinicians start talking about considering management during pregnancy, starting to talk about it. And, when you do the mouse studies, that's always the starting point for going to the next level. And that's why, we brought it now to the tooth level to start to see what kind of effects we have. But, the next logical transition is to go and start looking and examining patients. So I have one student who's very interested in this phenomenon. And so, I think this is what she's going to start taking up this summer and to say, what is it doing?
Yeah, is FGF23 the bad guy or the messenger?
Exactly. Thank you.
You mentioned effects on the cartilage for the osteoarthritis, and I'm sure we're all familiar with the bones.
Yeah.
But what effects does all of this have on our cartilage?
So the cartilages, this is a paper that I published a couple of years ago, and this is kind of an easy one. I think this is probably the most preventable part of the disease from the perspective of the murine model. And it's a predictable effect. When phosphate levels are low, our normal cartilages, I wish I had a whiteboard here. I don't even have my computer to show you, but our normal cartilages have two zones of cartilage. On the top zone is unmineralized cartilage. There's no mineral in there. Not many people know this, but we always have another zone of cartilage, and that's mineralized cartilage. And that sits on top of bone. So it's unmineralized cartilage, mineralized cartilage, subchondral bone. That mineralized cartilage has a really, really important role. It's a transitional tissue. It helps to kind of buffer those mechanical forces because our cartilages are at the ends of long bones. Those are the synovial joints. There's a lot of weight bearing on them. So cartilage is a really special tissue. They're not bone cells, they're cartilage cells. They're called chondrocytes. And they secrete a matrix just like bone, but their matrix has a different type of collagen. But the other thing it has is a molecule called proteoglycans. These molecules are heavily sulfated, and what that means is there's a whole bunch of negative charges. And what all those negative charges do is they kind of suck in water. So our cartilages actually have quite a bit of water in them, and that helps us to resist compressive forces. Think about filling a balloon up with water, and you can squish on this thing, and it really is kind of a nice buffer to mechanical forces. So underneath, in addition to the proteoglycans, you also have this mineral, and there's kind of a technical term that we use in physics to explain how it works, but the simple way of thinking about it is it acts as a transitional tissue. It's like cartilage because it's made of chondrocytes, but it's also like bone because it has mineral. So it's between cartilage and bone, so you have a tissue that's a little bit of both. And that really is super important in protecting that subchondral bone and making sure that that softer cartilage has something to sit on that's not bone, but something in between. So what happens, we found in the mirroring model, is if you don't have phosphate or untreated mice, there is no mineralized zone. It's just not there. And that's kind of predictable. It doesn't have enough mineral. What happens, though, when we treat with 125 and phosphate salts is that that recovers really quickly. It recovers beautifully. Proteoglycan levels, which the expression levels of proteoglycan levels actually goes way, way, way up. And that's a good thing and helps to accommodate for that loss in mineral. But it's really effective in reversing that effect. So that kind of starts to think about, that controversy of adult therapy. I mean, is this something we need to think about? If the other thing we found is when we then stop treatment, those chondrocytes, that mineral goes away. And the special thing about chondrocytes or cartilage is that you only make it once. So I taught this to my students all week. We were talking about different types of arthritis. It is a one-time tissue. You lose it, it's gone. So the way they survive in life is they're constantly making this matrix that they secrete, and a healthy matrix requires mechanical forces. That's a walking that you do, any sort of thing where you're giving, you're giving some sort of these compressive forces onto the cartilages. It keeps them making matrix and healthy. So if you take that mineral away by not, by stopping therapy, they technically revert back. So now we haven't reproduced this, we haven't shown this, we haven't studied this. This isn't studied in humans. That study wasn't funded. So, but the logic behind is to maintain healthy cartilages. We need to do that. So I came to Ultragenics about a month ago. I flew out here and I had an amazing number of meetings with people, and they are really, really interested in the effect that this new therapy has on the cartilages. So we're making that a new goal or a new endpoint in these studies to see if, are we going to improve these cartilages? Because if we can, technically we're not going to develop that degenerative arthritis, and we're not going to form those bone spurs that form on the ends of those joints. So, again, it's just a great conversation with me talking to them talking to me, and realizing like, hey, this could be a really good target for us to look at.
So my takeaway from that is until we have access to Kieran 23, correct? Until we have access to that, though, we should make sure that we don't have a gap in our phosphate and 125D coverage if we can, continue our medicines if we can to protect the cartilage.
So this is something that you have to discuss with your clinician. Again, it puts it back into that, but we have to be cautious about making these sort of jumps to, well, this is what we need to do. What it does do is say, this is what we need to look at in the patients, and that this, at least in the mirroring, it was incredibly treatable. It reversed like phenomenally well. It wasn't perfect, but I mean, the reversal was astounding. The enthesophytes, the enthesopathy, One more question, and I'm around for the afternoon if anybody has additional questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm 33 and I live in Boston, and I'm a spontaneous case, and I'm lucky in that I was diagnosed early and I had a phenomenal team of doctors both as a child and now as an adult. And I appreciate all the work you're doing around the transition of adolescence into adulthood, and also now you're looking at the 40 to 65-year-olds, but I'm 33, and actually that letter that you shared up there from the mom sitting up front, that could have been my mom. And to be honest, it's really hard at this age. I'm at the point where I'm deciding whether I want to have my own kids or adopt, and I feel like no one's there to tell me what to do. You're not studying me. And I just, I have a lot of decisions to make, and my doctors are phenomenal, but there's, and I have access to Dr. Carpenter, but just in the past few months, all of a sudden, all these things have come up, and I don't have support. And, I come to these things and I feel like I'm supposed to be proud that I have XLH, but it's really, really hard.
I completely sympathize with you, and I understand, and this is an incredibly difficult transition, and I'm so sorry. I wish I had an answer for you. The only thing that I can say at this point is really to surround yourself with a comprehensive healthcare team. I mean, you shouldn't go through this by yourself. There are, in addition to, your clinician is, this is the person who's writing scripts. There are other health professionals out there that can provide that sort of support that you need, the psychological, the mental support. I mean, you don't have to be strong all the time. It's okay to say, I'm overwhelmed. So using support services, making sure that to make your life a little easier as you start to experience these changes in your body. There's tons of adaptive equipment that will make your day-to-day life a little easier. We could be a room full of patients with another rare disease. It's the same tragic story. Again, together, we have to make some changes and commitments to treating these diseases, but I strongly encourage you to start reaching out for as much as you can from other support services. I know when I was first looking for a physical therapist to get involved, I'm not touching that. I'm not touching somebody with osteomalacia. And now I found somebody who says, not only will I do that, but I will come up with a program for these patients. And he sits with them, and Carol met Dr. Steigbigel, and he made all kinds of measurements of her range of motion and her mobility. And we're really trying to better understand. We don't have a cure. What we really would like to do is for people like you is to say, what can we do just to make this a little easier going forward? And again, I wish Maya was here because this is what she does. I think she would be happy to communicate with any of you. She's told that to me. She's actually, as a consequence of our studies, she's actually doing now a bigger study. She just got some funding to look at a larger cohort of patients with XLH, and I encourage you to, we'll put an announcement out on the XLH network, but she's really going to be looking more deeply at this, again, the psychosocial impact. And you know what? I honestly hope today you don't feel alone, because you have people here who are here for you. And take that opportunity up, because you know what? You all have very, very similar stories.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for being so brave. So Becky just sent me a link that she had received about some vitamin D that, you got, and I went onto the website and it was D3. I'm like, well, what the hell is that going to do? That's not going to do anything. So again, it's like going to trusted, embedded resources. Don't go to crap on the internet. The best thing we have in terms of resources is the XLH network. You have a scientific advisory board that's here to make sure that the information on there is vetted and true. I know it's tempting to Google everything. There's a lot of garbage out there. So, again, be cautious. Be cautious.
Be very cautious. Thank you.
Thank you so much.